welcome you. You came to get the world news from yours truly, the Honest Jew. Thank you very much for coming back. This is the 13th episode of the Victor News Network. Well, it's good to see everybody back. The beginning has been quite a bit slow, as you can see, and currently, well, I'm still looking and seeing how am I going to balance the news and also the recording time, since this is a one-man operation. But rest assured that the podcast will be as informative as ever, even if from time to time subjects may not be that many as not normally sometimes I've accustomed you to. Donations, since we're at this topic, they are on Subscribestar and Ko-Fi. Uh, just as I mentioned, in the earlier podcast. The links for both will be in the description. Minimum donation, I've set it for £5, but again, you can donate as much as you can on a monthly basis. The platform takes care of that automatically. Suggestions regarding videos and other things that may come into your mind are, as usual, accepted via comments to this video or via email at thehonestjew1@gmail.com or on X. The handle is at thehonestjew1. Might I please remind you to please and subscribe to this video, share it with other people that may find this sort of content interesting. It means a lot to me, especially again at the very beginning with the low view numbers and things like that. The algorithm pretty much doesn't exist. Links and timestamps, as usual, are in the description. First of all, I would like to start discussing about the Vance-Walz debate. So the debate, the vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, since this is exactly what happened, well, this morning at the UK time, and I didn't spend time to stay awake in order to watch it happening, but I have watched it this morning, and here's the reason why. Well, I kind of delayed the recording of the podcast because I try to look as much as possible into the debate, and I got about three-quarters of the way in, and I've already well written down a few points of the discussions that were carried out. Well, first of all, what is interesting to see is that the debate has accumulated about 6 million views on YouTube across all main channels where the debate was posted. So here I'm talking about the CNN, CBS, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, and others such as that, which is well quite an interesting thing if we are to look at it, because if I am to remember the previous vice presidential debate, the one between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, got considerably less views back then in 2019 compared to the one right now. And truth be told, it was also a lot more balanced conversation. Of course, it's always with the vice presidents that the conversation and the debate between them is more balanced than it is between the presidential candidates. And here I'm going to refer to what the character Frank Underwood mentioned in the series, which I'm pretty sure either a lot of you have watched or at least definitely heard of it from House of Cards. And when it comes to American politics, this thing well, really is true to some extent. Vice presidents can be either of these two things. One is a doormat vice president, and the second thing is to be a matador vice president. So even if the vice president doesn't have nearly as much power as the president when it comes to decisions, well, he still is the what was it, the number he's the number two person from the presidential administration, even though consultants do make their way much faster to the president than the vice president does, but also at the same time, the vice president is also at the top of the Congress. And as a tradition in the US, and especially in the past few years, the vice presidents were always looked at as a insurance option in case something were to happen with the president. The vice president, from the perspective of the opposing political party, has to be much crazier than the actual president in order to prevent any maneuvers of impeachment or outright throwing him out of office. Uh, Donald Trump definitely did that with Mike Pence. Joe Biden definitely did that with Kamala. But so far, it appears that there's a small difference. Mm, JD Vance, he's much more balanced and nowhere near as radical on some topics as Mike Pence used to be. Again, here, even if we talk about Republicans, they're again two different people which come from two different states. And well, it appears that it's definitely not the case with the vice presidents this time around. Both when it comes to JD Vance, but also when it comes to Tim Walz. Well, Donald Trump himself is the way we know him, and but from other perspectives, well, Kamala also has her own closet full of skeletons and also, well, a lot of stuff. So definitely, we witness a turn of events which we haven't seen in a while, where the vice presidents, at least at the surface level, look to be much more willing to work on bipartisan lines, but also capable of carrying a less inflammatory debate compared to the compared to those who are running for the presidential spot. And so from the very beginning, from the debate, the first thing that I've observed in the first few seconds was that the color of the podium was mixed up. So we had both the candidates, and JD Vance was on the left-hand side, and Tim Walz was on the right-hand side. But the background colors behind them were mixed up. Because on both sides of the vice presidential candidates, there were two banners with America Elects 2024, but the colors were mixed around because on JD Vance's side, the banner was colored blue, but on Tim Walz's side, the banner was colored red. And I pay quite a lot of attention when it comes to these details because with a lot of population, well, we all know that the color red resembles the Republicans and the color blue resembles the Democrats. And I'm definitely not going to jump into any conspiracies here, but this mix up bit it was either accidental or it had some purpose, or it may have had some purpose behind it. Continuing on, we'll started with a mistake referring to when the discussion began with what happened the night before. And speaking of that, in this podcast, no, I won't be covering any news regarding the ballistic missile attack from Israel from last night, which came from Iran. Not because articles may not be available, but in all honesty, I don't exactly have any new stuff to tell you, which I haven't mentioned last time uh, this such an event happened back in April, and my conclusion back then is just as valid as a conclusion right now. So you can visit my perspective in the podcast that was recorded back then. But getting back to the debate, Waltz first made, okay, a tiny mistake, but a considerable mistake from a vice presidential perspective, with instead of referring to Iran and its proxies, specifically the Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, he said Israel and its proxies. Then, well, in the introductory stage, Vance had a really strong start, putting ahead his resume, so to speak. Well, his family was on social welfare. His mother suffered from an opioid addiction quite a lot of time, and which led to him being raised the majority of the time by his grandmother. And then once his mother beat the opioid addiction, she started raising him, served also as a Marine in Iraq, who went to university on the GI Bill, the GI Bill being the benefit that the US military offers you after you served a certain time in the army. And he made a good point in the introductory stage, since this is also what Tim Waltz began with, and this is something that Tim Waltz later couldn't deny. Mm, Vance made a good point about bringing back Trump alongside the prosperity that used to be in the days of Trump. And here we refer to absolutely anything before 2020 and before the pandemic psychosis. So not only fuel was cheaper, but rental was cheaper as well. Also, cost of living was overall smaller than it used to be, and generally the sentiment was so much better in the within the American society, back when Trump was president. And that's just when we talk about the average people at a national level. The, the US for a long time in its history became an energy exporter compared to an energy importer, which used to be a significant geopolitical issue. And that's one of the reasons why the US really struggled long and hard to maintain a semblance of civilization and peace in the Middle East, because any destabilization would have led to the oil price going up. Many years ago, shale was nowhere near as viable in terms of extraction as it is today, and also other means of extracting the oil or any oil byproducts which could be distilled and turned into fuels, which at the end of the day, every economy on the planet still runs on them. And here is where Tim Walz already began with a really difficult position, because even if even a hardliner Democrat cannot deny such a thing. And okay, Tim Walz isn't a hardliner Democrat. He's more wishy-washy, but he definitely leans heavily on the Democrat side. When both were asked about Israel, of course, the question was put in a way that it looked like a setup from the very beginning. The the moderators asked whether each of the candidates would support Israel if they were to commit to a preemptive strike, and JD Vance's answer was pretty good when it comes to this. He just simply said, and here I quote, "It's up to Israel to decide a preemptive strike, and the United States supports its allies." Well, as any country allied with another country normally should, but they're still sticking to this Israel-Iran part of the discussion. Mm, uh, Tim Walz made quite a flammable remark, saying that Donald Trump pulled out from the nuclear program and made Iran get closer to the nukes. And here we can see the very first evidence of that problem within modern democracies is that the electorate doesn't have exactly too much of a memory span. The reason why Donald Trump got out from the Iran nuclear deal is because the Iran nuclear deal, the way it was devised by Obama, was very onerous, and not only gave a few billions of dollars, is essentially on the basis of a few promises from the Iran, alongside a few concessions like the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Authority, doing more stringent monitoring of Iran's nuclear capabilities, and especially those that skew on the military side. But overall, it's dishonest for Waltz to blame Donald Trump and especially even worse, to pin the fault that Iran is getting closer to nukes because Donald Trump pulled out the program. Since the investment in the injections of money back during the Obama administration into the Iranian regime definitely did much more damage than what Donald Trump did. Donald Trump just simply shut down the system, shut down a deal or the program, simply because well, he not only ran on that policy back in 2016, but then even the more realistic Democrats have seen that okay, well, Obama really messed it up by essentially giving Iranians free money and not many concrete promises that they're going to slow down their nuclear development. Also, the Tim Walz made another remark about how for Donald Trump diplomacy is carried out um, through the comments that he makes on his Twitter account. And here I take a particular not exactly disgust, but more like a dislike when when Donald Trump did so much more for the Middle East than any other president in so many decades. First of all, through Donald Trump, the Abraham Accords were signed, and and through that, initially the United Arab Emirates started normalizing the relationships with Iran, and now up until the 7th of October attack from last year, Saudi Arabia was also moving towards normalizing relations with Israel little by little. So in this case, Donald Trump did more for peace in the Middle East than anybody else could have, and it was also successful. So saying that Donald Trump is foul-mouthed and also writes really acidic comments on Twitter, which is exactly his style. It's not like his style also translates into diplomacy or diplomatic actions the same way as his tweets do. Here I take a particular concern about not just intentional avoidance, but also intentional misrepresentation of what exactly the Trump administration did at the end. And here we discuss about the real results. Also, we're in continuation discussing about the climate and energy. Well, Tim Walz was talking about how through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration and obviously Kamala's administration injected a lot of money into local economies in order to build renewables in the U.S. And especially Minnesota is a particular case. And since Tim Walz comes from the Minnesota, there is a solar cell battery, not solar cell battery, it's a solar cell factory in Minnesota, but JD Vance rightfully called him out when he got the chance to answer back to Tim Walz, essentially calling him out on the clean energy grift, and he mentioned exactly how yes. The Inflation Reduction Act did a lot, did make some investments into the U.S. economy in order to build the renewables in the country, but the vast majority of the money did not go into manufacturing and purchasing U.S. built stuff, but a lot of it went into purchasing the good old way, solar panels from China. And here, JD Vance cannot exactly be contended with because he's right from this point of view. And it's not just the US that does it this way, also Europe does it exactly the same way. Mm, The solar panel industry in Europe, if I am to make a reference back to one of the earlier podcasts, I did mention there, and there was also a political article mm, that was talking about this. Essentially, over a decade ago, the solar panel industry in Europe died simply because the Chinese solar panel industry, where they could make a much cheaper and also the manufacturing processes were much dirtier. And of course, since we talk about China, climate or pollution regulations are just as worth as much as the piece of paper they're written or printed on. Mm, JD Vance isn't exactly too far from the truth here because he's absolutely right. This is the way that things have been done. That's the reason why the solar panel industry went under in Europe, especially the European Union, and uh, and all these efforts of the Kamal administration. They essentially just funnel money in the pockets of the right people or in the pockets of the right interest groups. In in continuation, the topic moved to the border crisis, and that's one of the big topics on both sides. And Vance was set up in the question regarding the border crisis because both moderators, though both women, asked him if either he or the Trump administration, if they were to win the presidency, they'll support breaking up families with children born in the United States. So essentially, the anchor baby situation. And for those who may not know what the anchor baby is, um, and this has been a practice for quite a few decades, but nowhere near the level that it kept on happening since then. So that phenomenon is so much larger now than it used to be in the past. So since with the U.S. citizenship law, if you are born in the U.S., you are declared automatically a U.S. citizen, and that also applies at the same time for children who are born of U.S. citizens overseas. But here we stick with domestic U.S. For this discussion, and so. A lot of people, especially south of the U.S. border, when they went into the U.S., they put themselves to a lot of risk, especially pregnant women, because they knew that if they were going to give birth in the U.S., the child will become a U.S. citizen, and because the child will be a U.S. citizen, even if the mother or both parents are illegals, it's so much more difficult to build a case for deporting them, and it's not just very difficult, but in a lot of cases it's almost impossible to deport the parents unless they committed criminal offenses, and in that case it's going to be the responsibility of the judicial system, not of the immigration system. Only in that case would a parent or the parents be deported, and then the child will be put in foster care. But when it comes to immigration, the immigration authorities are not exactly too fond of sending the anchor babies of the illegal immigrants into foster care in order to deport their parents. Because many years ago, back in the late 90s, if I remember, they did try that during and in the latter days of the Clinton administration, and it turned out to be quite a significant shit show. And so what JD Vance said. So now you understand what being an anchor baby means. It means that your parents travel to the U.S. in order to give birth to you, so that you will get a citizenship, and you'll make them really difficult, if not impossible, to be deported from the U.S. and still manage to retain the illegal status without any legal consequences. And so, getting back to the discussion about the vice presidential debate, mm, JD Vance masterfully taxed the Kamala administration, the current one, not the candidacy part. Uh, he did say that well, okay, in this case, Joe Biden is the one that has signed tens of executive orders, if I remember correctly, about 97 of them, uh, of which only meant to suspend the deportations of the illegals, especially the ones that came south of the border. And at the same time, JD Vance also mentioned that the Republicans would start first regarding the mass deportation program that the Republicans are running on. Mm, He said that the first priority would be for the criminal illegals and not the criminal illegals such as okay, sure, even crossing the border within the U.S. is an illegal act, but he definitely talks about the murderers, the runaways from prisons, the drug dealers, or the drug manufacturers or drug traffickers, cartel people, people like that. That's exactly what at least the program entails, and the system and the system and the country wants to crack down on those especially, rather than okay, then you're a Mexican immigrant who's got one or two kids which are born U.S. citizens. It was never a concern that okay, it was never a concern to that level in the past, because even if the parents were illegals, well, at least they did some honest work. Okay, at the expense of regular Americans, because for some jobs definitely did disappear in certain states, the especially the ones bordering Mexico in the south, where you couldn't have for many years already. Say, for example, if you were a kid and you wanted to earn some honest money, and then you go to your neighbors and you ask them for something like well, $10 or $20 to mow their lawn. Well, not even the kid can mow their lawn for that money, because in the cases of a lot of people, no, they would rather prefer to go to certain places where the illegals tend to hang around, and just be picked, and those illegals, so they wait around there for a very good reason. And this is what a lot of people, Americans and non-Americans that live in the US, can tell you. And this is not just a phenomenon that happens at the southern states, it also happens in much further north and east from the border with Mexico. You have illegals hanging out there because they know that there will be Americans who will still be stopping their cars there, and they will carry out, well, discussion, well, as good as it can be carried out, depending on the English knowledge of the illegal guy. Well, what sort of housework needs to be done, or what sort of garden work needs to be done. But here I am using the best example and the most easily available one, which is with gardening, because that's one of the more famous and stereotypical ones with Mexican gardeners from the southern states. And that's where it's a valid argument to be made that that professional gardeners and people who invest quite a lot of money when it comes to tools and vehicles in order to get gardening at a certain standard. Well, you do it at a certain standard, but at the same time, you also do it for a sum of money because you're not working for free and you've invested some money into that business, so it's expected to get a return on the money that you invested into alongside the work that you need to do. And especially with Americans inheriting a lot of these English features, and this is also one of them being the obsession with having lawns in and around their houses, regardless if they live in New England in the US or if they live in Arizona. There are definitely plenty of jobs when it comes to gardening, just like they are here. But in order to do gardening at the level expected, especially Americans which do have a house in a HOA area can definitely attest to this. Well, when the demands of the HOA are that your grass may not be more than 2 or 3 centimeters tall, but it also has to be evenly cut. Well, in that case, sure. Mm, those people who can afford more, they'll definitely spend money on the American gardeners. But the rest of the other people, well, they are definitely going to resort to Mexicans, and then even if the richer Americans would have the money to contract American or domestic gardening businesses, even then, a lot of them resorted to using the Mexicans or the illegals in order to do the gardening work. And here JD Vance really makes a good point, and this is not only a very good point, but it's also very relatable for a lot of the voter base, especially in the southern US, who has gone through this phenomenon quite a while. In continuation, Vance also called out Waltz that he has to pretend that Kamala's economic policies were bad, while simultaneously Tim Waltz was ignoring the fact that U.S. farmers and the middle class had their take-home pay increased under the Trump administration. Just as I was saying earlier, during the Trump administration, not only the U.S. became an energy exporter compared to an energy importer, not only the people started having more money, but also the cost of living was so much smaller. But then people still made more money back then. And this is the reality that not even Kamala or Tim Walz can deny. And here, if you are more politically inclined and you've observed street interviews regarding the presidential election in the U.S., well, the argument of a lot of people, and specifically minority people, even from Democrat-leaning cities, mm, their perspectives on something like this. Well, I would vote for Donald Trump because back when Donald Trump was president, petrol used to cost $1 something per gallon, not free and something like it does now. Uh, my rental cost used to cost half than it is today. Food doesn't cost me a quarter more than it used to do 3 to 4 years ago, and even worse so when they're looking at the current admin. So here talking about the Biden administration, not only seeing uh, the way Kamala behaves. Well, on the other side, it's not like the Biden administration did something to address the issues of the common populace when it comes to these concerns. And that is a really difficult piece to destroy because the argument is perfect. Even though, yes, we may be looking at the rationale that things would have definitely been better if if nobody would have gone completely psychotic during the pandemic and resort to the draconian measures that were implemented, and the entire shit show was surrounded by those. Yes, I agree with that, but from a populist level, they're not exactly wrong when they look at the situation from this point of view either. Mm, uh, During Trump presidency, things good. Biden presidency, things bad. Yes, yes, it is black and white, but this is the electorate, and this is democracy. If by any chance you've forgotten, democracy is also the dictatorship of the majority. If by any chance this is a foreign concept to you, you're welcome to read Plato, because Plato understood really well the dictatorship of the majority, because he's gone back during ancient Greece. Through a lot of unstable times, and when unstable times led almost always to tyranny. Moving on to regarding the discussion, of course, abortion came into discussion since the overturning of Roe v. Wade is still something which Democrats lie through their teeth about. And here, in order to open up this subtopic, Vance said in public what essentially people like me and many other people who have a good idea about how the U.S. functions, they already knew that. Vance said in public that the true intent of overturning Roe v. Wade wasn't that Trump had a personal vendetta against Roe v. Wade, and Trump definitely did not go through that entire effort of naming those justices at the Supreme Court, which were favored by him in order to strictly overturn Roe v. Wade. But what J.D. Vance said was that Roe v. Wade was overturned in order to give back the autonomy and the decision-making autonomy back to the states on this certain topic. And here Waltz, from my perspective, really messed it up because at least he messed it up from the way that the U.S. as a republic is designed to function. Tim Walz insisted on the federal decision making, so he is pro Roe v. Wade in order to codify it into law in one way or another. And he used this example, which from my perspective, it's I'll be honest here, it's pathetic. He mentioned of a woman who was originally from Georgia, but she had to have an abortion for whatever reason. He didn't mention why. And she traveled from Georgia to North Carolina in order to get an abortion because the state of Georgia exactly voted to much more restrictive measures, and she was in a situation where she couldn't have had an abortion done in the state of Georgia. So she had to drive about 600 miles from the state of Georgia into the state of North Carolina. But it happened that some complications occurred, and she died on her way to the state of North Carolina to have that abortion. And here, okay, I can understand the perspective, but at the same time, it still doesn't change the fact that well, have we forgotten by any chance about personal responsibility? Okay, I understand that some things may go wrong, and if you as a woman you're stuck in an abusive relationship, or if it resorts uh, to really monstrous things like sexual crimes or rape or stuff like that. Okay, I get the point when it comes to that, but this example is really dishonest. It really is dishonest because at the end of the day, it's not the woman's fault that once Roe v. Wade got overturned, the state of Georgia voted to have much more restrictive abortion measures. But I will see from my perspective that it was definitely her fault that she remained there if she wasn't okay with it. And here. when it comes to the US, well, why maybe the pursuit of happiness was something that was codified by the founding fathers. That translates into if you don't like the place that you are or the community that you're part of, there is sufficient space to go somewhere else. The country is pretty big. It's an impossibility to not find something akin to your liking. Okay, you haven't looked, but that's on you. It's up to you to do your documentation. It's not up to the government, it's not up to somebody else, it's not up to your family, it's up to you because you are an adult at the end of the day. Where is your personal responsibility when it comes to things like these? Also, in continuation with the abortion topic, mm, JD Vance referred to the abortion measures in at least in some states before Roe v. Wade got overturned. He used the term barbaric, and which is something that Tim Walz took a personal offense, and and you could have seen on his face when he looked at the JD Vance, what exactly does this guy mean? And JD Vance brought a good example, which Tim Walz denied, and here I see this as a critical mistake. Uh, JD Vance mentioned a legal statute signed by Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, at the end of the day, before whatever will happen in the November election, regarding allowing a doctor presiding over a late-term abortion to not offer life-saving care if the abortion was botched and that baby was born alive. And here is exactly where here's an example that JD Vance has given, and which Tim Walz denied that it was actually like that. And Tim Walz kept on saying that the statute was misinterpreted. This was fact checked, and this is not true. But if you read the statute, which is available online, you can see that it is exactly the way JD Vance has said. But okay, I can see that this trick, nobody looking at a debate, or very few people looking at a debate like this will start Googling in that exact moment abortion statute Minnesota, right, the exact moment they're talking to verify if it's correct or not. Well, people have found out later on that from this perspective, Tim Walz not only denied that this was not true during the debate, but also it was proven that he lied because this is the statute that he signed. Well, and if you don't know exactly what you signed, well, then I'm sorry for you, but that's on you. Your signature, your consequences. The debate went on forward to discuss about firearms, and here the perspectives of both candidates were more balanced and more bipartisan than you could normally expect. Because see, here are also some differences. The state of Minnesota, even though it has very restrictive measures, at the same time, it's also a state which is full of guns. And with JD Vance coming from Ohio, well, Ohio being a southern state, of course, is going to have more lax gun measures or barely any, because they're much closer to the interpretation of Second Amendment than Democrat states tend to be. And here, what Tim Walz did is that he played the typical Democrat card by appealing to the emotions of parents, because most school shootings and normally and also this is the same argument that JD Vance made, only that the perspectives were different. Were different. Well, even JD Vance said that okay, well, uh, Tim Walz mentioned that his 17-year-old son witnessed close to a community center shooting in Minneapolis. Well, okay, this is definitely not a pleasant event to be living through, and since JD Vance is also a father, but he also has three kids which are still pretty young, as in the oldest one barely went to second grade, and with his kid being in a public school, I can understand the perspectives about this issue with the firearms, but Tim Walz kept on insisting that the when exactly when JD Vance started talking about there could be also be a consequence. The reason why we have so many school shootings in particular is because we kind of not cared about mental health, and especially the mental health crisis that's plaguing this country. And here he did a really masterful move. Since Tim Waltz mentioned Finland and saying that he visited Finland several times, and he looked at the fact that Finland is a country which has really high gun ownership rate, comparable to the United States and especially the state of Minnesota. But mass shootings don't happen there, and and then without actually outlining a potential reason why do school shootings happen here but they don't happen there, even though gun ownership rates are about the same, or even though much more numerous than anybody would expect. See, because with countries like Finland and Switzerland at the level of Europe, they're an anomaly because the rest of the countries from Europe have really restrictive gun measures or gun control or ammunition control. Say, take for Romania as a perfect example. It's easier to get a gun, but good luck getting the ammunition for it. And ammunition is not exactly something that well, sure, it's something that you can manufacture yourself, but don't be surprised when you end up on the list if you were to do such a thing. So, regardless of going back to the point that JD Vance made, as an answer to what Tim Waltz mentioned about comparisons between Finland and the US, he made a good point about the mental health crisis being a significant driver of not just school shootings, but also other societal problems. And holy shit, we know about that. Mm, But from an outsider's perspective, when it comes to the US, I'm kind of slightly worried if somebody mentions a mental health crisis because if somebody were to do anything for the mental health crisis in the US, since well, addictions are so much more than anywhere else, prescriptions are so much higher than anywhere else. Well, do you really trust some bureaucrats in order to write guidelines in order how to treat this? Especially in the case of the US, where everything that became a cause started making things so much worse than they used to be. So, well, since we're stick here to the education situation, well, somewhat, it's the discussion about schools. Do you remember by any chance George W. Bush's program with No Child Left Behind? And with No Child Left Behind, in the end, the consequences for that program is that some schools became so much worse than they used to be, while standardization became ever more important and ever more distorted the reality. But also at the same time, it facilitated a system where the aim is to get high grades and damn everything else. But how does it happen that everybody can get big grades? Well, you obviously lower down the standard, and that's exactly what happened through that program. The standard got dropped so hard that several years later, after Bush Jr.'s program, okay, we all like to make jokes on the internet about how stupid Americans are. And here, for anybody who has studied some sort of anthropology and human nature, mm, they would know that okay, when it comes to the U.S., the U.S. is a country of extremes. You also have some of the quote unquote stupidest people on the planet there, but you also have at the same time the smartest people on the planet there, and there are not many people in between these two. So the extremes are more visible than they are anywhere else. That's also because the country is still a new country, and it's also at the end of the day a country which was built by immigrants. So everybody who moved there, they wanted to be moved there. And okay, and during over time, since the U.S. has been existing for 2 centuries and a bit, Of course, that some mixing has happened through the generations, and the extremes, little by little, they start to flatten out. But the situation is still there because there aren't many people that were colonists back in the 1600s or 1700s or the 1800s compared to the influx that happened right during the 19th century, and especially the latter half of the 19th century, and particularly the first half of the 20th century. So that's why extremes like these are most obvious. So when we get back to JD Vance making a good point about the mental health crisis and it being a potential driver, and here realistically, it is a driver. We only don't know how big it is. Being a driver for school shootings and other issues, I personally wouldn't trust the U.S. government to come with a plan to counteract um, the mental health crisis, simply because I would know who would be exactly consulting the federal government if the crisis were to be taken really seriously. They will talk with the medics and the medics, which the vast majority happen to be in the pockets of the pharma companies, particularly the psychiatrists here. They will be advising, well, you know what those people need would actually be more prescription pills and more prescription pills in the country that experienced things like the opioid epidemic. That's which, by the way, I haven't heard anybody yet drawn and quartered the way that they deserve to after prescribing for such a long time to so many people in such large quantities of things like oxycodone. Here, I'm just saying that could be a start. Okay, you can be concerned about mental health epidemic, but not without those guys. Those guys have to go, and those guys first of all have to pay for have to pay for the opioid epidemic fuck up. Then then the debate went on to the cost of living crisis, and each campaign has proposed different measures on how to tackle this issue. So the Republican proposal was to transfer federal land, so land owned within the states but by the federal government, to transfer it back to the state in order to use it for house building, but also tackle the estimated 25 million illegal immigrants in the U.S., which compete in the same market, in the same house market as normal Americans, and generally the legal immigrants who are also workers in the USA. And that's exactly because at least based on what the moderators said, the house deficit currently in the US is about 4 million houses. The Kamala campaign wants to give from the federal government a $25,000 down payment assistance and $10,000 tax credits in order to entice the home buyers in order to purchase homes. Plus, at the same time, Walz talked about some local measures from his state of Minnesota, and uh, and how house building investments, well, from the state government within the state of Minnesota, they did actually provide good results. Well, they did provide good results to some extent, but what one concern, which JD Vance was right, but also the moderators uh, did put uh, did put this question. Well, if you are to give this down payment assistance and tax credits, wouldn't that make the price of properties to be higher? And the reality of it is, asking in Romanian, who and in which in this country you have the first house program, which is essentially a government-backed mortgages. Well, they're government-backed for the banks, not for the individuals, and also they offer preferable preferable rates and preferable conditions from some perspectives compared to traditional mortgages contracted through banks, with some disadvantages at the same time. And here the observation of J.D. Vance, but also the moderator, and seeing reality as it is, he is absolutely right when he said that this is just going to make housing much more expensive. And how do I know that J.D. Vance is right? Well, because I've seen it myself in the moment when a fuck ton of mortgages became guaranteed by the government for the banks in Romania. Prices artificially shot up, and prices still stay artificially high. Simply because what exactly happens when you get the sum of money? It's the same discussion as with this with you with the universal basic income. Through the way the money works in an economy, well, there is a certain level of work that is worth a certain sum of money, and then there are certain products which are worth certain sums of money, and those prices are set by the free market, by the so-called invisible hand, which actually tends to be realistically, many deals done between people, and then everybody agreeing agreeing through the market forces that okay, a certain price is considered fair. Okay, sure. When it comes to house building, there are many distortions that happen across the way. So if you were to buy, for example, a house in a huge metropolis, of course it's going to cost you millions of dollars, because there isn't enough space, and it's not just you that wants to live there. There are also many people that want to live there, and that creates pressure that creates demand pressure, which makes the price go up. But going back to government programs such as this first house mortgage, which, okay, the Kamala's program doesn't look like that, but the fundamental stays the same. So when essentially everybody who wants to get a mortgage could get, and they'll definitely go through the federal system if such a system were to be implemented, with getting essentially $25,000 free money and other $10,000 tax credits. But let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that they are $35,000. Well, from the perspective of property sellers, especially residential property sellers, and this is what we're discussing about, they're going to artificially increase the prices because they're just going to think, and I won't blame them for thinking like that. Well, we're just going to raise the price because we already know that they already have the money because the government gives them the money. So it's not exactly that we're taking government directly from them. We're taking that money from the government, and this is exactly what's going to happen if such a system were to be implemented. The prices will just artificially go up, just like how prices will artificially go up if everybody in a country were to be on universal basic income. If everybody earns because they live and breathe in the same country $1,000, automatically automatically the prices will reflect the fact that those $1,000 are not worth much because you haven't done anything for them. And no, paying taxes doesn't mean that you've done something for them. The value of that money, if you get it for free, that money has no value. It has no value by itself. And here's where situation would get to exactly if such a system were to be implemented. That's as much as I can say. As I told you, I've only managed to watch and listen to three-quarters of the debate, but these are about the major points which I picked up, and as you have heard me, I've discussed about. Now, as the vice presidential debate has been discussed, here we go now to the normal news that you've gotten accustomed with. Starting first with, as usual, with the US. Fox News. Elon Musk compares Newsom to the Joker after voter ID requirements banned in California. Democratic California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed legislation banning local governments from requiring voters to present an ID at the ballot box in order to cast a vote, a move which sparked backlash from Elon Musk, who branded Newsom as the Joker. Well, it is now illegal to require voter ID in California. They just made preventing voter fraud against the law, Musk wrote on X late Monday. The Joker is in charge. The bill was passed by the California Assembly in August after being introduced earlier in the year by State Senator David Min, a Democrat. Newsom signed the bill into law on Thursday. The new law was in response to the beachside city of Huntington Beach passing a voter ID amendment, Measure A, in March, with the support of a majority of residents, which would allow the city to require voter identification, increase in-person voting sites, and monitor ballot drop boxes in local elections. The measure won at the polls in March with 53.4% approval, county election data shows. But Attorney General Rob Bonta and California Secretary of State Shirley Ann Weber challenged Huntington Beach's voter ID law, which would have amended the city's charter to allow voter ID requirements by 2026. In their lawsuit, Bonta and Weber argued that the city's voter ID law unlawfully conflicts and is preempted by state law. California is one of the 14 states that does not require voter ID at the polls, according to the National Conference of State Legislators. The right to freely cast your vote is the foundation of our democracy, and Huntington Beach's voter ID policy flies in the face of this principle, Bonta said in a statement earlier this year. He argued that state elections already contain robust voter ID requirements with strong protections to prevent voter fraud. He said the new requirements would disproportionately burden low-income voters, voters of color, young or elderly voters, and people with disabilities. While that lawsuit made its way through the court state, Min introduced Senate Bill number 1174. It passed out of the State Assembly in a 57 to 16 vote, and in the State Senate in a 30 to 8 vote. The Huntington Beach City Council placed the voter ID measure on the March ballot after taking a series of hotly contested decisions on topics ranging from flag flying to the removal of books from the public library's children's section over concern about the appropriateness of materials. These moves were initiated by a politically conservative council majority, which took office in 2022 and have drawn scores of residents on all sides of issues to city meetings. Huntington City Attorney Michael Gates said in March that the passage of the amendment approved by voters was not only permissible but backed by the state constitution. Last week, he vowed to continue to enforce Measure A. The bill means nothing to the city of Huntington Beach, Michael Gates said, per OrangeCountyLawyers.com. The city is going to proceed with its voter ID laws because it has a constitutional right to do so. Musk's outburst is not the first time he sparred with Newsom. Musk last month encouraged his 198 million X users to share an AI doctor video of Vice President Kamala Harris after Newsom signed a bill into law banning digitally altered political deepfakes. Musk said he also plans to move the California headquarters for SpaceX to Texas after Newsom signed a bill into law that will bar school districts from requiring teachers to notify parents if their child uses different pronouns or identifies as a gender that's different from what's on school records. The SpaceX owner has also said that Democratic states are gaining an unfair advantage over red states in elections as a result of illegal immigration, since the census is based on a simple headcount of all residents, both legal and illegal. He said congressional representation and electoral votes are apportioned based on all residents instead of just focusing on citizens. Musk has often weighed in on voter integrity and immigration matters, writing on X in March that failure to require voter ID to vote obviously makes it impossible to prove voter fraud. That is why the far left refuses to require photo ID to vote. And with very much disappointment for the Democrats, Musk is right from this perspective. Because it definitely is like that. How does it happen? Is it just a pure coincidence that almost all states that vote Democrat also happen to be the places with most illegals? And there's also this perversion of the electoral process where the census counts all the people, whether they're legal or illegal, if they are citizens or not. At the end of the day, giving much more power to that state with the highest population. That's simply because the number of delegates is directly proportional population. That's the reason why California is the big California has the biggest delegate votes. It's for in a presidential election, for example. If I remember back at the previous election, California had something like 55 delegate votes for the presidential election, and man, he isn't wrong here. And a lot of fights have been carried out like this. And it's also and see even in the article it says that it would dispro so see for a voter ID, which could be which could be something as simple as a driving license in that state, because that's considered according to U.S. law as photo identification. How could you exactly say that requiring a photo ID would burden the low-income voters and the voters of color, or the young and the elderly and the people with disabilities? Well, excuse me, but aren't any of these people capable of getting something like a driving license or any comparable or any comparable other version of photo ID, like for example a passport? If by any chance you are one of those very few people who doesn't drive in the US or who cannot drive in the US, so here's also another variant. Here's a version of a photo ID that you can apply for, and you don't have to go fuck knows where. And this entire charade is even more obvious when in the moment when it experiences backlash. They just say, who is it that said right here? Let me have a look. Oh yeah, so the California Attorney General says that there are already in the state of California robust voter ID requirements with strong protections to prevent voter fraud. Really, really. Why am I having a difficult time believing this? And but probably having a difficult time believing these, considering the complete shit show that the 2020 election was. And it's not just that election in itself, but there were also many other elections in the past which were carried out pretty much in one way or another like this. So, and and to move forward with this topic, even the article itself, and I'm surprised that Fox News makes these really erroneous congruences, such as saying that Elon Musk is moving SpaceX from California to Texas because Elon Musk has an issue with the Chinese children, or with children and the genders and the pronouns. No, he's not moving SpaceX for that. The Even Musk himself said it several times that the reason why he moves it is that California legislation forces him to employ illegal immigrants, but at the same time, SpaceX is a company that deals with the federal government, especially military projects of the federal government. Not any company can work like that, and there are some really stringent measures in place, especially in order to prevent espionage of all sorts. And one of them is that you can only employ U.S. citizens. Those U.S. citizens, if they are operating within those military projects, they must have security clearance, and you don't get security clearance if you are not a U.S. citizen. But also at the same time, when you work on military projects, you cannot employ non-citizens. So Musk found himself in a situation where if he were to play by the way Newsom asked him to, or more like Newsom forces him to, well, yeah, you have to employ illegals because that's apparently the new law right now in the state. At the same time, Musk is also stuck between a rock and a hard place because the federal government will come after him and then completely drawn and quarter him if he were to employ those illegals, because he will suddenly lose the business. And why would SpaceX exist in that moment? If he were to play as Gavin Newsom sings, it just can't happen. And that's the reason. Sure, there's also a personal vendetta of Elon Musk when it comes to Chinese children and the pronouns, especially considering what happened with one of his sons, if I remember. But that's a different story. And sadly, Fox News should have known better. Should have should have put this into context and not make this erroneous congruence that Elon Musk is moving a gigantic company just because he doesn't like the school policy of California. It really is. It really isn't like that. Sticking with the U.S., so here's another thing that is putting significant pressure on the current administration. Financial Times. U.S. economy faces paralysis before election as dock workers go on strike. Business estimates stoppage could cost nearly $5 billion a day after impasse over wages and automation. U.S. business groups warned of economic paralysis just 5 weeks before the presidential election as tens of thousands of dock workers went on strike on Tuesday, shutting ports along the East and Gulf coasts. Dock workers, represented by the International Longshoremen's Association, walked out of major U.S. ports for the first time in almost 5 decades after their employment contract expired at midnight. Negotiations for a new contract, which covers about 25,000 ILA workers, have been at an impasse for months over pay and automation, according to the United States Maritime Alliance, USMX, which represents the employers. We are prepared to fight as long as necessary to stay out on strike for whatever period of time it takes to get the wages and protections against automation our ILA members deserve, ILA President Harold Daggett told picketing members in New Jersey on Tuesday. The 3 dozen affected ports, which stretch from Maine to Texas, together handle 1/4 of the country's international trade, worth $3 trillion a year, according to the conference board. The business group warned on Monday that the work stoppage could paralyze U.S. trade, halting imports of food, pharmaceuticals, consumer electronics, and clothing. The union said it would continue to handle military cargo. The closure represents the latest disruption to global supply chains, which have been strained by a drought, the limited traffic through the Panama Canal, and by attacks by the Houthi militant group in Yemen that forced vessels out of the Red Sea. JP Morgan analysts estimate that the strike could cost the US economy as much as $4.5 billion a day, but said they did not expect it to last longer than a week. A disruption of a week or two will create some backlogs, but the broader consequences will be minimal outside of a handful of very port-reliant areas, including Savannah, Georgia, said Moody's Analytics economist Adam Kamens. But anything longer will lead to shortages and upward price pressures. This will prove especially problematic for food and automobiles, which rely especially heavily on the ports that will be shut down. The White House said President Joe Biden was closely monitoring the strike and had been briefed that its effects on consumers were expected to be limited at this time, including in important areas of fuel, food, and medicine. Biden piled pressure on employers' representatives to make concessions, saying he had urged the USMX to prevent a fair offer to port workers that reflects the substantial contribution they've been making to our economic comeback. Julie Su, Biden's acting labor secretary, went further, saying, as these companies make billions and their CEOs bring in millions of dollars in compensation per year, they have refused to put an offer on the table that reflects workers' sacrifice and contributions to their employers' profits. USMX said its offer of a near 50% wage increase exceeds every other recent union settlement while addressing inflation and recognizing the ILA's hard work to keep the global economy running. On Tuesday, the union said it was demanding a $5 per hour pay increase in addition to absolute airtight language that there will be no automation or semi-automation. ILA members earn between $20 to $39 an hour under the old contract. The president has declined to evoke a 1947 federal law that would allow him to break the strike, rebuffing repeated calls from business leaders for him to intervene. Americans experienced the pain of delays and shortages of goods during the pandemic era supply chain backlogs in 2021, said Suzanne Clark, chief executive of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, hours before the strike began. It will be unconscionable to allow contract dispute to inflict such a shock to our economy. Well, if it really is like that, well, then why don't you give them what they're asking for? Even if, yes, they are a union, and I don't exactly take pleasure in the unions as a concept altogether. From this perspective, contextually, they have all the right to do so because uh, being a dock worker is particularly difficult work. And also when you are a dock worker in a country like the US, the working rhythm and volume is absurd, and also and also just to put into perspective, an average US dock worker, for example, anybody work in this particular example, I know it from the Long Beach port. An average dock worker consumes somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. They don't, and that means that they need proper food, and that food isn't cheap, even since you can't exactly be eating fast food and working at the dock at the same time, and also expecting to be alive for the next decade if you don't want to die of a heart attack. And not to mention that well, the situation of these dock workers was particularly appalling back when the pandemic measures were implemented, also with all the shocks to the supply chains, which here we cannot deny that they did happen, and you had the curious cases, again, really curious events that happened back then, such as containers which left the so-called West and went towards Asia would have cost essentially pennies on the dollar, but whenever a container required had to leave from Asia towards the West, it would have cost immense amounts of money, somewhere between 5 to 7 times more than it normally used to before the pandemic. And okay, this is a concern which is mostly about the way containers move around this planet. But these are the guys that are operating those ports in order to load and unload these containers. And you can imagine that for quite a few months during that time period, these guys didn't exactly have much work to do because there wasn't much container. There weren't many containers which were coming from Asia or from other countries because everybody kind of shut themselves and joined the collective psychosis of the pandemic measures. And these demands reflect exactly the fact that they've gone through that situation where they essentially sat on their asses and didn't do anything to work because the rest of the planet decided to turn stupid in an instant. But also at the same time, when shipping came back in one way or another, they had so much work to do is that they couldn't keep up with the demand, and they were running at max capacity, especially since late 2021 or early 2022. The influx of containers was just from all places was just so big, and this wasn't just a thing that happened in the US. It also happened in Europe, especially at the port of Rotterdam and Antwerp. In those circumstances, well, you can't exactly ping pong with these people, not specifically when you rely on them so much. And if and they're definitely not the sort of union like, for example, Europeans would think in the French sense, where okay, if they didn't get the salary increase that they wanted right now, they're going to go on strike and they're going to paralyze the country. And even this article mentions that this is the first strike in over 5 decades or something like that. So things worked well up until this moment, and something definitely went wrong. Also because dock workers don't tend to be um, politically affiliated in, so to speak, like other workers' unions are in places like, for example, all across Europe, and unions generally tend to be either approving of the left-leaning, or if they're not complete clients of a left-leaning party altogether. So overall, yes, it really is a concern, and this is definitely not going to help the current administration situation, especially since, just as I've been discussing in the vice presidential debate, well, it appears that the places were switched around, and back when the vice presidents used to be the so-called crazies. Now you have the presidential candidates, which are the crazies, and the vice presidents are the normal-ish ones, or at least they look like that. And with extra pressure like this, is definitely not helping Kamala situation, especially since things like these do not advantage do not advantage the current administration, which happens to be Biden's and Kamala's, and now since Kamala is running for the presidency, this concerns specifically her and Tim Walz. But it's funny that even though being part of the administration, being part of the establishment currently has its advantages, meaning that there could be ad hoc discussions or backroom discussions about how to mitigate instances like these. They obviously have bigger issues since they're not exactly concerned. And if you manage to piss off the dock workers after 5 decades, and let's pay attention at how many things happened in these past 5 decades from a shipping point of view. Well, definitely the U.S. imports a lot more, so that means that they have a lot of work, which advantage them. But at the same time, they also gone through three financial crises. Well, let's see. No, no, it was Black Monday in '87, the dot-com bubble, the Great Financial Crisis, and then the pandemic. So there are actually four instances which led to significant disturbances within their work within the work sector specifically. And uh, and even then, they didn't protest. They definitely did not go on strike, and they definitely did not shut down about two-thirds of the ports that the U.S. has, surface area-wise, because the West Coast, for whatever reason, is not affected. I haven't looked into the reasons why those guys didn't protest either, but when it comes to these ones, so the Gulf Coast and the East Coast, so essentially, where especially from the Gulf Coast, you have mostly energy resources which are transferred. So that means oil transfer from the oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico to the mainland, but also the loading of liquefied natural gas to be exported to Europe as well. And also, yes, there are surely some other cargo ports. But here, sticking specifically with the ports from the Gulf of Mexico area, well, do you really want to dick around by uh, by not paying those people enough, for example, to do something like load up your gas carriers in order to get the money from the Europeans? Mm, from this perspective, I think that the estimate of JP Morgan could actually be higher in reality than the 4.5 or $5 billion that these shutdowns cost per day. Moving on now across the pond into another insane asylum, also known as the Airstrip One, as Comrade Keir Starmer said in an article several days ago, things are going to get worse before they get better. And here we're going to be reading and discussing what does this actually look like in reality. The Guardian. Treasury asking ministers to draw billions of pounds of infrastructure cuts. Ministers are being asked to draw up billions of pounds in cuts to infrastructure projects over the next 18 months, despite Rachel Reeves pledging to invest more to grow the economy, The Guardian has learned. Members of the cabinet have been asked to model cuts to their investment plans of up to 10% of their annual capital spending as part of this month's spending review, government sources said. The demands would mean big projects such as hospital improvements, road building, and defense projects being slowed down or stopped altogether, as the government looks for ways to repair what they say is a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Economists warn that such cuts to capital spending could end up damaging the economy and Britain's creaking public infrastructure. Reeves, the Chancellor, told the Labour Party conference last week, "It is time the Treasury moved on from just counting the cost of investment in our economy to recognizing the benefits too. Growth is the challenge and investment is the solution." But Treasury officials argued that cutting spending on infrastructure in the short term is the only way to repair the gap quickly. One Whitehall source said, "We're being told the Treasury wants to borrow more to invest in the long term, but that does not cover the fact that we're being asked to take major capital spending cuts this year and next." The Treasury declined to comment on the spending review process. Reeves will announce her first budget as Chancellor on the 30th of October. It is expected to include a number of tax rises to help fund public services. At the same time, she will also set how much each department has to spend for the rest of this financial year and the next as she tries to plug the gap between the government's revenues and its expenditure. Ministers blame the previous Conservative government for this gap, which was partly caused by much higher spending on hotels for asylum seekers than planned. Countering this narrative, senior Tories say Labour spent more than they would have done to settle public sector pay disputes, accounting to as much as £9 billion of the deficit. Economists say a large part of the problem is that departmental spending limits were last set 3 years ago, before inflation soared and the number of asylum seekers rose significantly. To close the gap, the Treasury is asking ministers to model capital spending cuts to areas such as hospital building, defense infrastructure, and road and rail networks. Treasury officials say delaying or stopping projects that have not yet begun is easier than changing welfare schemes that are already in place or making large-scale redundancies. Labour has already said it will review the last government's plans to build 40 new hospitals, which the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has described as an unfunded commitment. Darren Jones, the Treasury Chief Secretary, recently sent indicative budgets to departments to give them a sense of the scale of cuts the government wants to make in this financial year and next. Last week, he began face-to-face talks with ministers to thrash out the details of exactly how much each department will be required to save and how. These indicative budgets have infuriated some ministers who think the Treasury is once more prioritizing short-term financial control rather than the country's long-term economic interests. Many economists also argue Reeves and Jones should look elsewhere for immediate savings, even if they prove trickier to find. Some in Whitehall argue that the capital spending cuts will be particularly difficult to sell to the public, given Reeves is simultaneously making the case for more government investment in the long term to boost growth. The Chancellor is working on plans to change the government's definition of debt to allow her to borrow billions more to spend on capital projects, while sticking to her pledge of having debt begin to fall in 5 years' time. But officials say that it will not alleviate the immediate pressures that have to be tackled in this year's spending review. Talks between the Treasury and Whitehall departments will continue until shortly before Budget Day, with ministers hoping to reduce the demands before then. Ben Zaranko, a senior research economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies think tank, said, "Capital budgets are often the first place governments go when they need to find quick savings. It's easier to cancel a building project that hasn't started yet than it is to lay off staff." But these cuts add up over time and are one reason why our public services are less efficient than we might like and why large parts of the public realm are in such a dire state. Tom Railton, director of the Invest in Britain campaign, said, "The only way to end the UK's economic stagnation, fix our crumbling public services and ensure climate targets are met is to increase public investment. Not only do leading economists agree, the public does too." We need more public investment, not less, and a fiscal framework that supports long-term planning, not short-term bookkeeping. Mel Stride, the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, said, if the government comes forward with plans to cut vital productivity-boosting investment, then that is a cause of real concern. The fiscal rules are deliberately focused on a 5-year horizon to avoid making sudden cuts of this kind. We should be finding ways to increase capital funding, not reduce it. So first of all, it's funny to see in this article the very last sentence. The fiscal rules are deliberately focused on a 5-year horizon. So are you telling me that fiscal rules are essentially just a modern variant of a Stalinist 5-year plan, but working in a specific way, which is not like the 5-year plan because this doesn't focus, it doesn't concern manufacturing quotas, but it's not exactly far off either. Then I can understand from one perspective having to stick at one point fiscal policies and fiscal rules, because if you don't, and if you find yourself in a situation where you happen to change the fiscal rules every year, or in other cases of other countries, even more than once a year, then you automatically create an unstable business environment. And depending on how the cuts or how the rules are changed, mm, that instability also ends up making you uncompetitive because you have because a business has no predictability whenever tax laws or tax rules change or the fiscal rules change depending on the demands of the administration during that current year. It doesn't exactly work like that. On another side, if by any chance, and here this is definitely a shot in the dark, but I'm just going to say it, if by any chance Labour cancels the HS2 project, so that will be the high-speed rail project, which is shrouded in controversy because the costs of that infrastructure development have gotten really, really high for many, many years. But that's also a good part of blame of the government because it's been underevaluated, and then they waffled on with the project, and then the pandemic hit, and with the pandemic hitting, all obviously due to inflation, the cost of that investment also rose significantly because everything else has gotten more expensive: labor costs, construction materials, expertise, and other things. And it has also experienced during the Tory regime mm, considerable changes and cuts in the infrastructure project altogether. But I'll just say this right now: if by any chance Labour manages to shut down the HS2 project, I'm going to film myself and I'm going to post a video of me laughing if this were to happen. Going back now to the seriousness of the topic, mm, through this article you can really see the problems from a fiscal point of view in this country. For starters, you have the huge sums of money that are paid to hotels in order to house the asylum seekers, and those asylum seekers, their numbers are getting even bigger and bigger. And obviously, you have to house them somewhere. So where exactly do you house them if not in the hotels or accommodations of your special interest groups, which also may happen to fund your campaign as well, because at the end of the day, you give them the best business that's possible. You give them maximum, you give them as big of an occupancy as possible, and very generous sums of money in order to hold those cohabiting peoples in this country where they normally shouldn't have been. And on top of that, okay, when it comes to hospital improvements, well, here I'm just simply going to say that I have no idea about that. But when you're talking about mm, cutting from infrastructure maintenance from today, so the infrastructure that already exists, so not anything else that is planned to be built, but also cutting from defense projects. Have you forgotten by any chance that not many kilometers away there is a war being carried out, and not only that, but the direct opponent of that country that you're supporting in that war also has essentially an open way towards you, mm, the, through the Atlantic Ocean, through the North Atlantic Ocean towards you. And how exactly could you find justifiable, even as a Labour government, uh, you're supporting a party in a war against a really old enemy, but at the same time you also want the defense cuts when the military hasn't been doing it well already for the better part of a decade. I find it absolutely amazing, and this is going to be really curious. How will the budget be looking like at the end of this month? Because we got 28 days left until the budget has to be uh, published and presented to the public. Yeah, this is going to be amazing to witness. See what sort of machinations will they, or how far would Labour go in order to save the welfare system that not only them but also their political clientele depends on. That'll be obviously the NHS and but also other special interest groups which support Labour. Of course, doing all these cuts at the expense of the larger public. Moving on now, we go further east since I mentioned at the beginning, as I was discussing and commenting on the vice presidential debate, that when it comes to the Middle East, no, that is something that I will not discuss because it's been already discussed. It's literally nothing new. Well, aside a few operational factors, but you're not here to, I assume, to have me discuss about, well, the particularities of Israel's invasion into South Lebanon and also uh, the response both of Israeli air ballistic and strategic defense against the Iranian volley of missiles. The only thing that I can comment about that is that well, I can't wait to hear what sort of opinion will Jordan have since quite a lot of debris from the Iranian ballistic missiles fell into Jordan as well. But that's about it. So continuing on, South China Morning Post. How China's one-child generation got trapped in the population pyramid. This is going to be an interesting one. China's one-child policy has created a zero-sibling generation, and caring for parents and children in a tough economy is taking its toll. Wendy Liu has grown to dread the sound of her phone. These days, most calls mean a parent of the 47-year-old vocational school teacher has been rushed to the hospital. Whether her mother with Alzheimer's disease or her father with cancer, any emergency means a long, anxious drive from work to her home in Guangzhou, a stress-ridden trip she has made on countless nights. Liu and her husband, Deng Jie, are members of China's first generation of only children. Born in 1977, only a year after the country instituted a one-child limit for most urban households, they not only have to raise two children, but also care for four aging parents. Last month's announcement of higher retirement wages and persistent levels of youth unemployment are adding to worries that they will need to work longer than their parents did, all the while providing more financial support to their adult children. The dilemma of balancing care for the elderly and the young is becoming more commonplace as this cohort enters middle age. This sandwich generation is being overwhelmed with threefold pressures: a longer life expectancy for their elderly parents, extended dependency periods for their children, and hurdles in their own careers compounded by the economic downturn. Raised without any siblings in the 1980s, China's first batch of only children were once jokingly called "little emperors" for being the sole focus of their families. But as they have grown into adulthood and started families of their own, these former household monarchs have found themselves on the wrong end of a top-heavy population pyramid. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, between 1982 and 2023, the average life expectancy in China rose from 68 to 78.6 years, while the proportion of people aged 65 and older jumped from 4.9 to 15.4%. At the same time, the children of the sandwich generation are grappling with an unforgiving job market, with many dependent on family support even after graduation. Per official figures, the jobless rate for the 16 to 24 age group, excluding students, rose to 18.8% in August, up from 17.1% in July. The plight of Liu and Dang, seen in families around the country, is having downstream effects almost certain to dampen the younger generation's desire for marriage and children even further. Deng, once a real estate project manager, lost a secure income amid a prolonged slump in China's property market. Liu, meanwhile, is working hard to secure a professorship, leaving her little time to look after her parents. Although Deng's parents are still in good health relative to Liu's, their advancing age has brought greater need for daily care. I'm anxious, but the reality is that there will be more caregiving ahead, and I won't be able to manage it all, let alone start a new career, Deng said. The only relief may come if one of our parents passes away, but that is heartbreaking. With Deng's income stagnating and their daughter unsure if she'll find a job after graduation, things are looking bleak, and their two flats have also depreciated in value. Our wealth is starting to be insufficient to cover our current expenses, let alone future costs as we age, Deng said. The couple's daughter, currently in her third year of college, needs about 100,000 yuan, so that's $14,251 a year for tuition and living expenses. Education costs are also rising for the 12-year-old son. According to a projection from Peking's University Department of Sociology, the proportion of dual only child families where both parents and only children will peak at 34.2% by 2030 in urban areas. Single only child families, where one parent is an only child, will account for nearly 50%. Both are expected to present unprecedented challenges in elder and childcare alike. My husband and I have a combined monthly income of just about 30,000 yuan this year, a third less than last year, and we can't put anything into savings, said Li Wei, a photographer and part of an only child couple born in the late 1980s. The outlook is grey, she said. We are in Shenzhen, my parents are hundreds of kilometers away in Shantou, and my husband's parents are thousands of kilometers away in Yanchang. We have a mortgage of over 900,000 yuan to pay off and children to raise. To make matters worse, the simultaneous aging of the population and declining birth rate are having a suppressive effect on consumption, which may in turn harm China's overall economy, said leading demographic economist Kai Fang at a conference in Beijing last month. Our parents are in their 60s, Li said. They might continue to work odd jobs to save some money for the next time they get sick. Yi Fuxian, a senior scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison who studies Chinese demographics, has argued China's one-child policy has necessitated an increase in the retirement age and depressed the youth population, resulting in insufficient domestic demand, lower employment and exports, all of which conspire to limit growth. When other countries reach China's current tertiary enrollment rate, the service sector typically provides 70 to 80% of the jobs, he said. But due to underconsumption, China's service sector provides only 45% of jobs. This makes it difficult to employ college graduates who are primarily engaged in the service sector, resulting in high youth unemployment and declining marriage and fertility rates. China's social security system has yet to account for the shortfall. According to data from 2022, less than one-third of Chinese workers pay into unemployment insurance, and only one-quarter of the urban unemployed actually receive benefits. More than half of all these pensioners, primarily rural seniors, received a paltry average sum of 205 yuan a month. And these are the early days of the demographic shift. One study by Peking University estimated that by 2030, China will have more than 77 million elderly people in need for long-term full-time care. My parents are retired workers, and although each has a pension of more than 4,000 yuan, it can't cover the medical expenses, said Xiao Hui, a 43-year-old media manager living in Shenzhen and another only child. Her parents are born in their 70s. One suffers from Sjogren's syndrome and polio, and the other has Parkinson's disease, conditions which require costly medications and frequent hospitalization to treat. After insurance reimbursements, I have to pay at least 90,000 yuan a year for the medicine bill, let alone care fees, Xiao said. Probably the only way out is to sell the house to meet the expenses of my parents and children. But when my husband and I grow old, odds are all children will repeat what we are going through now. That thought breaks my heart. Independent demographer Hong Wanzhang said the present quandaries of the only child generation could snowball as other age groups will witness their hardships and seek to avoid their fate at all costs. The government must realize that future economic issues stem from an excessively shrinking population, Huang said. There has never been a case like China's, where a country's annual newborn population dropped by half in just 7 or 8 years, and the root of the problem can be traced to the one-child policy. One group of retirees seem to have avoided such a fate, these formerly employed by China's vast bureaucracy. Many leaving the urban state apparatus depart with higher pensions and levels of healthcare reimbursement than their rural and private sector peers, providing the elderly in this contingent with a level of stability that allows their children to breathe easier. In some cases, even one-child couples can ask parents and grandparents to assist with major purchases, a phenomenon referred to as having six wallets. But in the medium term, the bigger picture is far from certain. The International Monetary Fund has projected China's gross domestic product will drop to about 3.3% by 2029, a significant decrease compared to the last year's 5.2%. No one can solve this group suffering without effective incentives and changing society's pessimistic expectations for continued population shrinkage, he said. Only then will companies have the confidence to invest and young people have job opportunities with stable incomes. Otherwise, the social and economic pressures of young people in the future will worsen. And here is the reason why I put this article is that this opens the discussion into something which may not be exactly that related, but you will get the point, you'll get the logic of it by the end of it. Have you wondered by any chance when Putin decided to invade Ukraine, why exactly did he do it in the moment that he did? So that was in the morning of 22nd of December 2022. Well, one of the most valid explanations that I've heard of was that Russia was already on a demographic landslide for many decades, but things turned particularly worse after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And with the leadership at the Kremlin being the way it is, and you know very well what I'm talking about, you this entire conversation boils down to a few simple things. Well, the administration and the government has certain aspirations, such as that one with having to, well, with wanting to reform Ruski Mir, the Russian world, and then you have well, all the other typical KGB agent-induced paranoias, like how was that one with Putin invaded Ukraine because Ukraine was going to enter NATO, and Putin wanted to avoid that. Really, that's not the reason. And and to get further to this point, the simple answer was demographics. And with the population of Russia continuing to shrink, you get at a certain point, and this happens with every country, with no exception whatsoever. Demographics works more or less the same, even though it may take decades for you to get there. Sometimes it could take more, sometimes it could take less, but when it comes to demographics, things are pretty clear. And when you are experiencing a shrinkage in the population, and also there are no realistic ways to produce some sort of sustainable demographic development. Take, for example, what Japan is doing. Japan is trying to become as independent as possible and as automated as possible because they are aware that they're not going to have the population required in the future to maintain the current economy because there will simply not be that many people. And this is an even more obvious phenomenon in workaholic societies like Japan's or Korea's. But see, at least Japan and Korea went down the technology route. But with civilizations presenting quite a lot of differences between each other, and Russia being a unique case, the calculation done by Putin, and this is what seemed like the most plausible explanation for me, aside from the political, economical, and other sorts of aspirations. I looked at it from a larger point of view. But the reason why Putin invaded when he invaded was because that was one of the points when he was definitely told, or he found out himself, that if I were to wage a war for the interests of the country, then from that moment on, it would have been much more and more difficult, simply because there wouldn't have been the people to fight in that war. And even now, when he allegedly uh, chose the very last moment but to invade, and even now he's got significant challenges when it comes to the fact that after all the country lost quite a few hundreds of thousands of men, and even if this at the level of entire country is a drop in a bucket, even when it comes to a country like Russia, those sorts of differences are obvious. And and okay, things may not get to that level, but looking into larger history, in the moment when in any country that was on the planet, once the male death ratio went past 40%, that country was finished. That country was from that point demographically finished, because those other 60%, obviously, that they're not going to be they're not going to be adults. They're going to be either be pensioners, disabled, people with issues, or kids. And with those, we cannot exactly build and maintain a society. And here's the other discussion as to why getting to that level and experiencing such serious death ratios is particularly dangerous, because it's not like you're going to be Russia, even if it was one of the countries which practiced, thanks to Bolshevism, absolute gender equality, meaning that both men and women not only they had to work, but they had to work in industrial sectors, like if you are to press steel plates together, then men and women will work side by side, because that's what the party ordered, and you can't exactly go against the party's wishes. Well, that was the case back then, but the Russian society now is not the one that used to be before, in the past. And okay, sure, some of the women could adapt and could exploit the opening opportunities, but biology is a crude mistress at the end of the day, and you will realize really really fast that certain jobs, they simply cannot be done by women. Are you going to ask a woman to build you a house? Have you tried putting a sack of 40 kilos of cement on her back when the woman is probably 50, 60 kilos? Well, she'll crumble like paper mache. That's already food for thought. And imagine that when it comes to supporting the infrastructure of an entire country, you're not just going to resort to carrying sacks of cement on your back, but you're going to have to carry mm, a lot more things with a lot more specialized machinery, and you're not going to. Here's also another good example. Even though it may sound like we're getting off topic, but be sure that you're going to see where I get at. You, would you imagine those of you who are familiar with the trucking business, or more like with the trucking occupation? Doesn't matter if it's the US or Europe. I know that there are some differences, but let's just talk about the working style of that sector, which is critical to the way products move in our world. Can you really, do you really expect a woman to go through the humiliations that an average trucker goes through whenever he drops off the freight at the business, and then those whoever supervised the business or supervised the staging area, they start chatting shit like, well, that isn't right, that isn't right. Here, I'm going to report you. All you, all you. I can see that you may have caused some damage, or oh no, you haven't driven properly, so you're going to get into trouble because the products you delivered are not exactly of the same quality as they expected. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, but whoever knows understands shit like this. This is something that men have to go through, not every day, but at least from time to time. General shit like this, that due to circumstances, you don't exactly have people in these circumstances don't exactly have realistically much choices. Well, okay, if you can consider unemployment as starvation a choice, sure, but no, but even then, and it's not like you can suddenly go through professional reconversion. You can't become if you were to go down the career route of a guy driving a truck to become a welder or become an accountant, because that shit takes years to learn. It's not like something that you do a 3-month course and that's it. Well, okay, for say basic accounting, you can be taught most of the all the relevant things that you need to know in the span of a month. But take, for example, any other occupation worth its money is it's not going to be smooth sailing. And what the truckers do as the nature of their job, well, they travel, and they travel for days or weeks on, and sometimes months on end, and be sure that you've paid attention to the same roads for 14 hours a day. You don't exactly feel like having to study on Udemy some courses in digital marketing or in Photoshop, because your brain just wants to sleep in that moment after paying so much attention to the road, and also in itself being a very boring job, because most of the times you're driving alone, but at the same time it's also the liability aspect. It's obviously going to be really difficult and really strenuous, and if you do that, you're better going to stick to doing that, because you cannot realistically do anything else aside from that, unless you quit trucking. Unless you quit trucking, and then your results may vary. So you see, you can't realistically can't expect women to work at the same level as men do in certain fields such as these, or certain occupations such as these, to be more precise in my language. And then China finds itself in the same situation, only that the issue with China is that the societal norms are considerably more different than they are in the West. Not even Eastern Europe, which is still more family centered, and with bare few exceptions, like the clan structures of Celtic societies such as Scotland and Ireland. We don't exactly understand here in the West the importance that Chinese society, or East Asian societies, or Asian societies in general, especially once one uh, that also applies in the Middle East, but the further east you go, the more parents are an integral tool, and parents, there are these societal obligations to take care of them once they will grow old and they will no longer be capable of working, and that also includes things like visiting them when they're sick, or covering their health expenses if they cannot afford them. And when you have the societal obligations, but you also have the societal obligation to raise the next generation, but you don't exactly you don't exactly have who to raise, who to take care of your parents with. You don't exactly have who to take care of your kids with. Also your earnings are really stretching thin your possibilities, and at one point you may realize that it'll be a really viable and surprisingly carefree life to go back to the rural area where your parents come from and become a rice farmer with all subsequent consequences of that choice. Whether they may be good or bad, it depends on everybody's perspective. And this is the real sad reality, but as it is, and China has absolutely no way out of this one because it's not like they can pull a Mongol empire and start raiding neighboring countries to kill the men and take the women, bring the women to China, and start building artificially high populations like that. Even that shit will take a while for it to show. And but that's already something that's out of discussion because the Chinese really care about their heritage, about their not only their culture but also their genetic heritage, and they wouldn't exactly want to go down such a route. Even if some did, like for example, this is also another issue, which is why I'm betting on the fact that China going to war will be a much higher possibility than up until 2023 was Russia, simply because the the gender ratio is also much more messed up in China. Asian societies really place great importance on their boys and especially the firstborn boys. And China in particular went for a long time at to that level where in order well you see during the first years of the one child policy in order for the parents back then to guarantee that they may at least have somebody who will be obligated to take care of them when they'll be old, their preference was to have boys because that responsibility societally always fell on the boys and on the firstborn in order to take care of the parents and because he would also be the first one that would inherit the assets of his parents, which is why in a really twisted and messed up way Chinese societies prefer boys. But how exactly they prefer boys? They prefer boys by uh, by going to clinics, someone they discovered that they were going to have a girl, they resorted to an abortion, and that has happened for many years. I'm not sure if it happens now, but it was still something that you could still hear that it was happening, especially in if you were getting closer to the rural areas of China back in 2013, and 2013 was 11 years ago, and you see in the span of 11 years how bad things have gotten. So there's other messed up issue. In the latest statistic that I remember, the male to female ratio in China was I think 139 males per each 100 women. So you can imagine that there are as a proportion 39% more men than women in China simply because of this all this social preference and the culture. That's honestly a recipe for disaster. Since one of the big drivers of rebellions and revolutions have always been young, unemployed, and hungry men, but they are also the most easily manipulated. In this time, I don't think that the CCP can pull any sort of manipulation card on the population because the younger generation, so anybody who is in their 20s or 30s right now, is for one reason, which is also presented by this article from South China Morning Post, it is really valid. They don't want to experience the same problems as their parents experience right now with their parents, with having to stretch yourself so thin that and when you search yourself that thing, you're not going to do so. You're not going to do any of them good because at the same time with the work commitments that are in China, remember the 996 working schedule? How often do you really think that you could afford if you work from or how much energy do you think that you're going to have if you work from if you're from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week? That leaves you only Sunday, and even if China has invested a lot in infrastructure, especially high-speed rail. First of all, it's not like average people can afford high-speed rail. But on the other side, realistically, how much time and energy have you got left after working for that much during the working week to go and visit your parents? Okay, this is offset in one way or another through the Chinese for the Chinese or the Lunar New Year because you get quite a lengthy vacation, which is always the sort which is spent with the family, similar to how Christmas is in Christian societies. I'm not going to talk about Judaism because when it comes to Judaism, the community and spending time within the family aspect is generally done during well once every week during Shabbat. And it's easier to keep the Shabbat as long as you're bunched up together. Mm, Simply because you stay under the same roof and then you follow all the same rules, but then you also carry out well things like prayer time and stuff like that. But again, to make it more comparable, Chinese Lunar New Year is like Christmas for us here in the West. During the Christmas time, generally the tradition was that you would spend Christmas with your family, just as the Chinese spend the Lunar New Year with their families. But herein lies the issue, and to bring the entire subject full circle as to why it's I'm still betting on the fact that China will go to war against Taiwan or against somebody in one way or another. It's because no, it's because these guys aren't stupid. From some perspectives, they're definitely much smarter than the Kremlin administration, and they're looking at the same situation as Putin used to look at, several years ago. And they're also looking at the same thing. And okay, even if China has the tendency historically to implode as a country, China used to implode as a country when it was standing on its own. When and what I mean by China staying on its own is that even if China always traded with Western countries in one way or another, Western countries were never so influential in China compared to how they are now, especially after the 1980s, and when essentially plenty of people and businesses from the West moved to China, and also a lot of Western education moved to China, and that's the reason why private schools in places like Beijing can cost even $30,000 a year. Well, one reason is that sure, it's schools are also exploiting this feature of Chinese society with emperor children. Or emperor kids. Okay, there may not be only one these days. Okay, but there may be two. But still, here that sort of market is geared towards people who can afford, and also can afford paying $30,000 per kid to keep him in school. So that means two kids, $60,000 a year, starting from the first grade. They can definitely afford many other things. But that comes to a limit. But why this is important is that not only well, the Western did not only come with its businesses, it also came with its ideas. And even if through the typical arrogance of the Chinese society, they still hold themselves high and mighty that they are the oldest continue society on the planet. At the same time, nobody is immune from it, from ideas from the outside. And here is why, with things like these, even the Chinese people can sometimes get ideas, and it doesn't have to be through those that are so open to the West and who read foreign literature or who have attended foreign schools within China, especially since China in itself is doing is going through a lot of efforts to prevent such a thing. For example, you cannot be in a school with a foreign system if you're not a foreigner. But and how the Chinese exactly end up end up going around this regulation? Well, they simply have a kid in a Western country, and those that do definitely can afford it. So when they come back, the parents may still have only Chinese passports, but then the kid may have a Chinese passport and a U.S. passport. But by the law, he's considered to be legal. And there have been plenty of generations of those children back then, which have grown with Western ideas, and it's a high possibility that they also may get Western ideas when all these problems will rear their ugly head. But still remaining on topic with the government, definitely Xi Jinping and the CCP are looking at the same exact situation as Putin has looked at several years ago, and and definitely the pride of China will be even more painful than than the pride of Russia, especially because China is also populationally a much bigger country, and I wouldn't exactly bank on the fact that okay, China spends says once every few months that we're going to invade Taiwan, we're going to prepare for the invasion of Taiwan. Okay, sure. Right now it doesn't happen, but you remember that a certain Austrian painter, almost a century ago, also published a book which may have been called My Struggle. And whoever read that book back then also thought exactly the same. Well, what's gonna happen, man? This is just a crazy guy who orchestrated a beer hall putsch in München and got arrested. And he probably wrote the book in order to kill off all the free time in prison. Yeah, that's what people thought of in what was it in 1923 or 1927. Come forward a decade after that, and then the Austrian painter and his political party was a force to be reckoned with, and not exactly far off after uh, that certain Austrian painter triggered the World War. And definitely, if when China will be starting to invade Taiwan or any other neighbor, they will also trigger another world war. And they'll trigger the same world war because I'm not exactly banking on the possibility that they may just go away quietly. They may not just go away quietly because there's way too much to lose and there's way too much at stake. And also differences of opinion also tend to be pretty binary on these things, and the vast majority still believe that Taiwan is rightful ancestral Chinese land, and even if the entire planet may go to war against us because of that, God damn it, we're still going to reclaim it because we are a proud Chinese nation. Who knows when it may happen, but it's better to not hope that it will happen. But at the same time, and here it's a subtle segue to, not subtle segue, but a subtle reference to what I was talking about in the article about UK Treasury and their fiscal cuts. You don't want to be caught in such a scenario with your pants down and unprepared. Okay, you can never be rightfully prepared 100% of the time. Not even the US Army, not even the US military is capable of that. But you don't want to get caught with your pants down in a situation like this. Moving on now to the last article. We're obviously going for the last article this time to the conspiracy theory at the southeasternmost point of the planet. The Sydney Morning Herald. The morally wrong restriction the police refuse to follow. The COVID-19 public health orders were a one-size-fits-all approach forced upon the police, who struggled to decipher the ever-changing rules that they did not request nor want, the state's top officer has told a panel of business and community leaders. The former New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller, who led the force throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, said updates to the health orders, which dictated what people could and could not do as New South Wales Health tried to stem the spread of the virus, often made little sense, but they were not always enforceable. The orders made out in the Public Health Act covered a range of restrictions at different stages of the pandemic, but from how many guests could attend a wedding or funeral to patron numbers in cafes and restaurants, trading rules, and social distancing. Even those who could take to a dance floor was at one stage determined by a health order. A panel of 6 experts, which included Fuller, convened by the Sydney Morning Herald to interrogate New South Wales' approach to lockdowns and policing, agreed that the health orders lacked clarity, should have been more localized, and continued for too long once COVID-19 vaccines were available. The health orders also risk creating serious social division. Fuller said the health orders were fast-moving and did not pass the usual parliamentary scrutiny of any other legislation. For the first 3 months of the 2020 lockdown, New South Wales Police did not have a legal representative at the table as the orders were drafted. There was a direct-level approval process. Brad Hazard, the Minister of Health at the time, would sign off and ultimately that would empower those orders. Then police had to operationalize those as best as possible. Fuller said he did not know how many health orders were enacted. I would hate to think, but he only ever requested one. That was on a $5,000 on-the-spot fine for people who cough or spit on health workers, police, pharmacists, paramedics, or other public officials. In November 2022, 33,121 of the 62,138 fines handed out since the start of the pandemic were withdrawn after Revenue New South Wales considered in court that they were not valid. Fuller said police did the best they could, bar one incident on the 31st of March 2020, when a convoy of 5 patrol cars drove through the Rushcutters Bay Park in Sydney's east, directing people to comply with the latest social distancing orders. At the time, the eastern suburbs had been identified as a cop hotspot. Fuller considered it was a terrible look for police. The cops should have been out of the cars and talking to people and just explaining it, he said. However, beyond that incident, Fuller said that the police were just carrying out their job, albeit one they did not relish. It was a challenging time. I don't feel as though we were over-policed, but I totally understand the community disliked the health orders, and police didn't like them either, to be honest, Fuller said. One of the toughest things about the orders were the exemptions that would follow the next day. A city divided. While the image of police officers descending on Rushcutters Bay played on Fuller's mind for months after, Adam Leto, the chief executive of think tank Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue, has an equally powerful recollection. 2 months into what will become the 107-day Delta lockdown in 2021, southwestern and western Sydney, home to the most ethnically diverse communities in the city, had far tighter restrictions imposed on them than the rest of New South Wales. 12 council areas were declared areas of concern as virus case numbers climbed. By late August, those 12 hotspots were slapped with a 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, and outdoor exercise was limited to 1 hour a day. The rationale was that too many people were moving around Western Sydney, taking the virus with them. The result was that Sydney became a city divided. I think there was a failure to really understand that the movement wasn't residents spinning on the government or spinning the system. It was born out of necessity. People couldn't work at home. Some didn't have digital connectivity. Their work required them to move. Their life required them to move. They had care responsibilities. They had extended families. So there was a lot of movement. Former president of local government New South Wales and the city of Sydney councillor Linda Scott said she vividly recalls driving to southwestern Sydney when the announcement was made, passing military personnel on the way. It was a stark difference to much of the city. Scott said the risk of serious social unrest in Western Sydney was very real. On the 20th of August 2021, the day 12 areas of concern were declared. She held a press conference in her capacity as a local government New South Wales president, with then Mayor of Canterbury Bankstown, Carl Asfour, whose council was one of the dozen affected. There was a dangerous vacuum of information, Scott said. Nobody, none of the mayors, none of the local leaders could tell their community what it meant for them. We couldn't tell them why. We couldn't tell them what it meant. None of us were clear on what people were allowed to do or not, Scott said. It was a very dangerous point for social cohesion, where communities did not understand and did not accept why they had been chosen. Leto said Western Sydney residents were watching vision of people picnicking at Bondi Beach while they were only allowed for an hour a day for exercise. The panel agreed that far better communication was needed, involving community members and religious leaders, before the poorest areas of the city were plunged into a stricter lockdown. The panel concurred that stay-at-home orders and restrictions needed to be place-based. Not all Western Sydney is the same, so your methods and your approach to Penrith are going to be different to what your message is as how you communicate that to Fairfield, Leto said. It needed to be nuanced, it needed to be considered, and it needed to be consulted with local councils, with community leaders. Leto said the southwestern Sydney lockdowns took him back to the Cronulla race riots of 2005. It had a mood and a tone to it that I could see that if it wasn't handled appropriately, that there were enough ingredients to spark something. East versus West was real, and tensions were high. It didn't get to that point, thankfully, and that's a credit to the government and Mick Fuller. Whiplash responses. Nationals MP and former Deputy Premier Paul Toole was a member of the coalition government's crisis cabinet, which met daily for much of the pandemic. He said the priority from day one was the health of all New South Wales residents. That was the right approach, he said. However, that attitude continued for too long and ultimately at the expense of the economy. The panel, which also included Professor Patrick Mogori, a leading adolescent psychiatrist and 2010 Australian of the Year, agreed with Toole's assessment. If you went by the advice of health, we will probably be in lockdown still today, Toole, a former police minister, said. Toole said the early days of the pandemic brought whiplash responses as a little-known virus from Wuhan, China, made its way to Australia. Suddenly, New South Wales was grappling with the same deadly disease that was killing people on the other side of the world. Toole said the then customer service member Victor Dominello was the first to provide briefings to the cabinet, and then Premier Gladys Berejiklian. Every decision, Toole said, was based on New South Wales health advice. But eventually, as the pandemic dragged into its second year, the public stopped paying attention. There were public health orders that just kept on changing. Even when the Premier stood up and did an 11 o'clock presser every day, people were starting to get fatigued by the end of it, Toole said. There's another public health order, there's another change, so people then stopped listening. Toole said the public health orders were often too city-centric, especially when it came to restrictions around how far people could move. Travel in the city is very different to travel in the regions, and sometimes it was, hang on, this is not going to work. This might work here in the city, but this is just ridiculous having a public health order for the regions, Toole said. A previous panel of health experts convened by the Herald and to probe pandemic decision-making warned that while the public largely comply with the health orders, the population's willingness to forego freedoms would not likely be repeated. New South Wales police would also be less willing to enforce the orders. While police were responsible for enforcing the health orders, Fuller said that there were some requests that could not be delivered, such as a Melbourne-style ring of steel around southwestern Sydney. Hundreds of police staffed Victoria's Ring of Steel for about 4 months in 2020, when Melbourne was under tighter restrictions than the rest of the state. Fuller was also asked to do the same. He refused. There were 330 roads they wanted me to lock down. It was logistically impossible, but it was morally wrong as well, Fuller said. There was also another flaw in that plan. Local governments owned many of those roads, and they had not been consulted. Scott said it was another example of poor communication. There was this instruction to close roads that we owned, that we didn't know about, that we couldn't enforce, she said. Everyone was trying to act in the public interest, of course, but there was a complete failure of communication about what needed to be implemented and what could be implemented. Ultimately, a more effective response to a ring of steel was found, Fuller said. It was, in fact, the local police relationships with the imams and the other community leaders and local government that really saved the day there, to be honest, it said. Keep it simple. The panel also took issue with the complex nature of restrictions and their multitude of exemptions, saying in a future emergency they should be kept as simple as possible. Margie Osmond, head of lobby group the Tourism and Transport Forum, said, "If you're a business that has multiple outlets in different parts of the city, keeping up with all the difference was just diabolical." Leto said the ambiguity around the restrictions caused tension and frustration in Western Sydney. "I think about a lot of people in Western Sydney thought that there was one set of rules for some and one set of rules for them," he said. Scott agreed. "We had great trouble interpreting the health orders and in managing the infrastructure. The curfews were very difficult in particular. We had some councils interpreting the health orders as we should rope off playgrounds, which at the time may have seemed sensible, but in retrospect probably meant that less people were using outdoor spaces and congregating indoors," she said. "Any decision has consequences, but communication about how to interpret these things, giving a clear reason why they were put in place, would have really helped. They revealed the inequities in green space across Sydney in a very stark way." Fuller said some of the rules New South Wales eventually implemented during the Delta wave, such as 5 to 10 kilometer travel radius, were more about trying to get the community to come on board and understand the importance of social distancing or staying home, rather than because they had a very specific purpose in stopping the spread. "Some of them, I think, were more hopeful than really thinking they were ever going to be enforced. And I think that's okay," Fuller said. "We were never going to police it properly." Chris Minns took over as Labour opposition leader in June 2021, just before the Delta wave hit New South Wales, and generally offered bipartisan support for restrictions and health measures introduced by the then coalition government. Now as a premier, Minns said it was important to refer critically on the COVID-19 response, but would not buy into specific conclusions drawn by the Herald's expert panel. At the end of the day, leaders across the world were asked to make critical decisions that would impact millions of people in a very uncertain environment based on the information they had available, he said. "Not every call was right, not every call was wrong. There are always things we can do better to ensure we are prepared for emergencies like another pandemic." If this article does not give you a perspective of how absolutely insane that country is, then I don't exactly know what else will. So you have this news agency which spends money to organize and discuss about the pandemic inquiry. And they also go through all the efforts to bring all sorts of experts, essentially telling them that holy shit, what you've done, what you are doing the pandemic was so wrong. We don't even know where to grasp it from. And then you see stuff like this. Then we have a police chief officer that just plays the card with "we were following orders," and then you have only the mildest doubts set on the health establishment, and especially the public health establishment, not the medical health in itself, but the public health establishment, since even as this article mentions, essentially the restriction orders, they were barely ever put to scrutiny, but there was always signed just as they come, and they had to be enforced by somebody. And of course, when it comes to government, who are you going to rely on enforcing such a things, or aside from the monopoly and violence that you possess? So that those being the police and the military. And then you get to stupidity such as this. You get to stupidity such as this, where where you essentially split in half an entire city because the health order said so. Well, who exactly from that health ministry knows what's best for that place, and they definitely don't know how to do their job since they decided that they're going to implement statewide measures when in New South Wales you have of course Sydney, but then you have three smaller cities, and the rest are essentially villaged here. What the hell are you gonna do? But then these genius health experts decided, well, we're going to need statewide restrictions, and then we're just going to give you only a certain radius in which you can move to. And okay, but if you give a guy that lives in rural New South Wales a 10-kilometer radius, well, that mean that could also mean that within that 10-kilometer radius, he's still going to be on his property sometimes. In most cases, if for example the guy has a ranches in let's see, for example, ranches in Australia sometimes tend to be bigger than even small countries in the world. So how exactly are you going to implement and first of all, how can you even at a fundamental level dare to consider such measures to have any sort of sliver of logic and also have the absolute shameless courage to essentially shove these health orders down their throats and when they are just simply given the sheet of paper, here you go, here are the restrictions, you go and enforce them. We don't care how, but these are but this is what's supposed to happen. And of course, well, the police, well, this police commissioner definitely won't get scot-free because you see, mm, with this part, we were just following orders. And I'll reiterate this point as many times as it is required, especially because this is again a really relevant example to bring in order to put the situation in perspective. During the war carried out by the Russian painter, there were also a bunch of people, like a few hundreds, like a few tens of thousands, that were also following orders regarding some labor camps. They could have been in Germany or in Poland mostly. And guess what? In the moment the war ended, and those guys ended in the court, and in the particularly egregious cases, they ended up in the court at Nuremberg. The excuse with we were just following orders did not cut the mustard. Well, they did not pass the mustard. And those guys and those people paid with their lives. They paid with their lives simply because, just like how Christianity at least used to teach us in the past, when you'll end up on Judgment Day in front of God, you cannot exactly tell him that you were put by a superior person on earth to do some particularly egregious things, or that virtue was not convenient in that moment. But here I'll stick specifically to that one. If and within within the Eastern European common people, this sort of psychological slash philosophical argument has been settled pretty easily. In Romania, it's pretty simple. Back when you're a kid and you do something bad, and you do something bad because somebody, generally an older kid, told you to do it, and you got caught for it. Obviously, you're going to use the blame, but he's the one that told me. And the answer that follows, it's going to be it's always going to be another question, but the most popular one is this one. If that kid also told you to jump into a well, were you also going to do it just because he told you to? In that exact instant, you also realize that just because somebody told you to do it doesn't absolve you from the fact that you still did it yourself, regardless who exactly told you. And here's apparently something that has been sadly forgotten over the decades, and apparently the more godless this world becomes, the more things like these would happen. I believe that religion is a personal thing, but when it comes to entire countries and entire societies, these things actually end up being very important, and particularly mm, See, this just reminds me of things that even people that have documented the war in the Ukraine, but also other people that have published stuff about previous wars carried out in recent history. But when it comes to Europe, I got the best two examples that I can provide right now is the war in Ukraine and the former war in Yugoslavia. But on both sides, but when it comes to the humanity of individuals, and this is also what that journalist for Associated Press, the guy that made the movie 20 Days in Mariupol, he did say this, and well, he had this conversation with the guy that was a one of the very few police officers that remained in the city of Mariupol before and before and after he got encircled, and they essentially could only get away with a Red Cross convoy. The discussion they had while they were on the ground and getting shot at from all directions by the Russians, it was simply well, exactly during this war, it really shows and it really pulls out into the sunlight mm, what sort of person each individual is. People who were bad before ended up being much worse right now, since there's apparently no sort of law or judicial system to keep them in check, and they're in the perfect context to be as exploitative as possible, and the good people end up being much better. Things in times of crisis, sadly, turn to be pretty black and white, and it's up to the decision of the individual what they are doing in that moment. And make no mistake, okay, I may be comparing a pandemic with war, but I wouldn't. I would go as far as say that the government of Australia, and especially the local governments of Australia, essentially wage wars against the virus, because and if I remember correctly, back when I was still filming the World Sofa Report with Lucian, they used this phrasing at least once. I'm not exactly sure who did it, but I surely remember there were several cases where they essentially phrased it like this, that we're carrying a war against the virus. Sure, you carried a war against the virus, and you had your entire population that ended up as collateral with shit like this, and the sheer goal to ask what this commissioner said. He asked on health orders to have implemented $5,000 on the spot fines for people who cough or spit on health workers, police, pharmacists, paramedics, and other public officials. Well, excuse you, but last time I checked, the government was of the people, by the people, and for the people. And you're not a special class of people. You're not a special class of individuals because you don't live in Airstrip One. You're not INGSOC, and you're not definitely living in a feudal society where you and your buddies from the bureaucracy, you are some sort of mm, superior individuals of really refined pedigree to warrant having such preferential treatment, and especially $5,000 on the spot fine. But okay, the Australian dollar may not be worth as much as the US dollar, but that still means a fine between 2,500 and 3,000 US dollars on the spot. Who the fuck has money to pay for this? Let's be honest here. And Australia isn't the only one that's guilty of this. The UK had pretty much a similar implementation, but at least in the UK, there haven't the fine the way it was written down. It was the fine for not respecting the pandemic and quarantine measures was a fine up to £10,000. And up to a certain point, I think well into 2021, well, at least until the latter half of 2021, there were only singular cases of people that have gotten the top fine itself, the £10,000. The rest who didn't wear masks or who were outside at the wrong time of the day, they mostly gotten anywhere, or they haven't worn the mask in the supermarket. They're mostly gotten 100 to 150 pounds fine. Not and okay, that was for not wearing a mask. Okay, but spitting on public officials or coughing into them. Oh, okay, leaving the gesture aside, but you see, leaving the gesture aside, I'm looking at this from the perspective of whoever you could consider the population of Australia. Generally, pe people on average don't resort to behave like that towards their public officials, whether they may be local government, local council, or anything bigger. Fucking hell, how many times do you remember a a prime minister or a minister getting spat on? I certainly don't remember them, and mostly there are better ways to show to show your anger at an elected politician, and in this case, it will be easier to toss some paint on him or to toss some ink on him rather than outright spit him, especially because who exactly remembers what society still in at least in the West, or whoever can be considered the first world, still consider being spat on as disrespect. Nobody does it, especially in our modern society, where even using the wrong pronouns is something really inflammatory, let alone spitting on somebody. I surely remember I haven't spat on somebody ever since I was in middle school. Let alone and giving yourself through a health order the protections IDs and those and not exactly protections IDs, but giving yourself such powers to pretty much ruin a person by giving them a ruinous fine. Fucking hell, happened. I'll just put this question right now. Well, of those of you who live in in first world countries and in areas like North America, Western Europe, UK included, or any other countries that you could consider first world or high income, how many of you have you got $2,500 on you right now? I certainly don't, and I'm pretty sure not many of you don't either. And especially if you may have $2,500 US dollars, you don't have them there in order to pay some egregious fine, even if the fine is for spitting on a public official or some special employees. The principle still stands. It's punitive and it's ruinous, and uh, and I'm pretty sure that if anything, the city of Sydney would have deserved a riot not even similar to the one that happened in 2005, but on these principles, you have some faceless health experts telling you that in this certain perimeter that you live in, you cannot get out of that perimeter because oh no, there's a virus that's coming. There's a virus that's there, and oh yeah, it's so deadly. Yes, it's so deadly. I'm pretty sure that. And we already have the statistics. So this discussion with the breaches of basic principles of basic humanity and of fundamental rights, this conversation will not die down anytime soon. And in the case of Australia and New Zealand, it will particularly not die any soon because those are the countries where the slippages from these points of view were the most egregious by them all. Here, okay, they made and they were even worse by comparison, even to the country where the virus originated from, so from China. But even then, in China, you don't have any expectations because they're at the end a communist autocracy, which also employs state capitalism wherever it can. You don't have expectations of China to behave to behave like a Western country. But when it comes to Australia and New Zealand, well, excuse me, then you deserve to be treated and judged on the same standard that everybody agreed on. But only you considered yourself in a sudden moment so special that you started turning into outright tyranny. Because this is what exactly happened. By the way, this article reads, and I'm pretty sure that the Sydney Morning Herald may have a bone to pick with the administration of the city of Sydney or the New South Wales government altogether. I cannot blame them. I cannot blame them if that is the case, so which is probably that's a justification for continuing to bother with documenting about the COVID inquiry and also forming all sorts of panels of experts and keeping the discussion alive essentially and keeping the eyeballs on it as much as possible because apparently there are still people who still have a sense of justice in that godforsaken country. And I say godforsaken country when you outdo China in terms of tyrannical measures, then that's a place that you're not going. That's a shit stain that you're not going to clean anytime soon. And it's a particularly dark one. It's a particularly deep one. And hmm, and the consequences are so expansive. You don't even know where to begin looking at from. And the consequences. Sure, some of them have reared the ugly head, but some will still take a while. They will still take a while, especially the one with all the newly mentally ill people that had perfectly normalized before the pandemic, and when the governments decided to turn into warmongering and tyrannical against the population and and in the name of the virus or waging a war with the virus and forgetting that there are still people in flesh and bones who still needed to have a life. Mm, but I just want to remind a point that was brought up when it comes to mental health. Sure, there are some really happy cases of people that have grown stronger during the pandemic, but there are also the people which either turn now or will be turning in the near, medium, and even distant future into potential serial criminals. And leaving the jokes aside with Austria being a penal colony, mm, it's a really messed up thing that for a damned virus in the end, which did not even do as much as people expected. Again, I would look I'll look at making these experts pay for what they did because they seriously overstepped their bounds. They seriously overstepped their bounds, and even if they didn't bullshit you accidentally because they used some sort of analyses or models which were completely unrealistic when it comes to the real world. See, for example, that guy Ferguson. I don't exactly remember his first name, but the guy with the very first COVID-19 spread models, and his model essentially treated the entire country of the UK like it was a gigantic London with those spread rates, and that caused a gigantic level of panic in the spring of 2020. I'm pretty sure that the Australian health experts did exactly the same, or even worse. They copied the model, and when they realized that oh, holy shit, this is wrong, they didn't exactly want to take the blame and say that we were wrong because the entire country was looking up to them. the sheer arrogance of the many people working in the medical field. We've done so many years of university, and we've done so many years of work experience. We know best of what's for you. This is about it from the 13th episode of the Victor News Network. I was going to say earlier of the war so far report, my mistake. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe to this video, and if you have to share it with anybody who may find content interesting, please do so. And if you have some spare change, please give shekelim. Thank you very much for watching, and see you. Cheers.